To start off though, I've got a knowledge base article open here, and a link will be sent to everybody at the end of the webinar as well. But there's two files that we're going to be working with today. There's a spreadsheet file and the actual import map for the CRM. And so you'll have access to download both of these files to utilize the exact same files that I'm going to be using as sample templates. And the actual spreadsheet that I made for the properties and owners is basically something that I've built out of the most commonly used fields that I see from customer import data. So those will be available, well, those technically are available right now if you go to our help desk, which you can just go to realnex.com. When you're logged in, on the left pane, you'll see knowledge base there. And when you click that, it'll open up the knowledge base, and you can just type in sample import, and it should be the first one that comes up there. So all of you can download these spreadsheets, the spreadsheet and the map file for the RealNex CRM, and use this to generate your own spreadsheets in order to make importing quite a bit simpler that way. I do also want to reiterate that if you do have questions, feel more than free to ask them through the space provided in the question and answer section. I will take time at the end to go through each and every one of those that I can at the time. So don't hesitate to ask any questions about anything that might not make sense or that you've just been dying to ask. So, like I said, we will be starting with importing into the online CRM. So I'm just going to be working with a blank database on this because I'm actually going to be importing the exact same file into both the online and the desktop CRM to kind of also show what the differences are. So the first thing to go for is, or to open up, is the actual spreadsheet that we're going to be working with. So this is the spreadsheet file that's available for download on that knowledge base article. And most of you should be familiar with stuff that looks roughly similar to this. Of course, this is going to be primarily from the standpoint of properties with the building owner, as that is the lion's share of the imports that come our way. But all of the concepts are going to be the same for importing in properties with owners, importing in leasable spaces with the tenants, sales comparables, lease comparables, and so on. The database imports all work the same, they just have slightly differing information based on what you're importing. So when you're importing spaces, you get options for importing the linked property, the owner of that linked property, the tenant, both the contact and the company. And when we get into the actual imports, that'll you can visually see that a lot easier. But this is just a very common sort of template. And if you see, we've got, the basic address information for the building, the ownership information, and if you also notice, a few of these owners are in here multiple times. So we're also going to cover to make sure that you don't import duplicate information. So that's one key element, and you'll notice why that's a pun later on. One key element of importing is making sure that you don't import duplicates. So instead, we should end up, we see Curtis in here 3 times just doing a quick glance. We should only end up with Curtis A. Bunsen there 1 time, but each of these 3 buildings that we import should each be linked to Curtis. So we're going to be talking about that as well. If we keep going to the right, we see more owner information, and then we see, again, it picks up with other property information, the acreage, building size. So the basic type of stuff that you'll see from a lot of different data sources out there. And so what you can do is you can take this actual template file and just remove everything after the first row, and then just take your spreadsheet that you have the information saved in. Let me just find anything else. So I'm just going to open up a second spreadsheet as an example here. And so you can take the information for each of these. So this one is the property name. I can just go in here, select all of the values in that row and copy, and then go into the template file that we have and go to that field, which is actually going to be the first one here as well, and paste it in there. And so you can just go through each of these. That way you can just utilize that template file as well and not have to actually go through the hassle of mapping the fields yourselves. So depending on how different your spreadsheet is, that might be a much quicker and easier way to go about it. And then you would just rinse and repeat for all of the different columns. Of course, we'll also talk about if you have pieces of information that aren't available in the spreadsheet. So of course, on the actual template, you can go all the way to the end and add an additional field. Let's say in addition to the ones that we've included here, we also need, let's go with building construction type. So we can just add that as a column here, and then when it comes time to import the file, we can just append the map and add just the columns that we've added to the spreadsheet into the map. And so that I'll actually go into a little bit of detail on as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get this back the way it was originally. Let's see, just reopen the file. Okay, so when importing into the desktop CRM, you have to have one specific file type, and I'm just going to talk about this while we're in Excel. So when you go to File and Save As in Excel, when you're importing into the desktop CRM, that file has to be a CSV, delimited file. When importing into the online CRM right now, that can be a CSV, an Excel workbook, XLSX, or Excel workbook, XLX, or XLS. I always have problems with those extensions. So any of those three will work for the online. For the desktop, use the CSV. So due to that, I just almost always use the CSV, as it'll work for both in that case. So once you've saved your file and you're ready to import it, close the spreadsheet, and then we're going to go ahead and start off with the online CRM. So when you're in the online CRM on the RealNex website, unfortunately at this time this is not available from the app itself. So this is for online. It's from the online online web version of RealNex.com, clicking on the CRM. So when you go to My Account, you'll see an option for import. And right now there's two options, contacts and properties, and we've actually been updating and adding more to these as the days have gone by. We actually should be having an update for the contacts and properties import that'll also import linked companies to both of those, and that should be coming in the next, we expect it coming sometime in the towards next week, toward the next couple weeks. So we're coming kind of pretty fast with the updates of this. So some of the stuff that I say is not capable now, very possibly will be in the next week to 2 months. So we'll be constantly making some changes to these. So today we're just going to work with the properties. Contacts is very commonly used, but it's the exact same process as doing a properties import, just slightly less complicated, as a properties import actually includes a contacts import in it as well. Because when you're importing properties, you're also able to have it linked to the owner contact. So when we click properties here, it's going to bring up a screen, and this is a screen where you select the file that you're wanting to actually import in. So if you actually notice here, please select a file to upload. It shows you what the actual supported formats are. Then it also has download sample files for CSV, XLS, and XLSX. So these three are actually very similar to the one that I put up on the knowledge base article, but includes all fields. So when you're importing into the online CRM, one thing that you're going to want to do is go through the spreadsheet and delete the columns that you don't need, because the import itself will take more time based on how much information there is, how many rows, as well as how many columns it has to map. And because this is an online cloud service, the way that the actual import process happens is once you've started the import, it puts your import into a queue along with any other imports that are happening. And so just due to this very nature, right after this webinar, it might be backed up for a little bit. So be patient. It does go into the queue, and so in the order that the upload was received, we will then begin to import the data into your online CRM. So depending on the size of the file, how many rows there are, and how many columns, this can affect how long that actual import process will take. And of course, with any new thing, it's going to be a little bit more backed up right off the gate, but as time goes on, the usage of it will be much more regular, and you'll notice speeds will increase quite a bit after the first initial go with everybody using it, as this is something that was just recently added to the system. So I just wanted to quickly talk about that for a moment. So you hit Browse, and it'll bring up a selection screen to browse for your file. So I'm just going to select that spreadsheet file that we just had open and hit Next. So on here, it's going to give you a little bit of information at the top, kind of explaining the process a little bit. And then down in this section, this is where you actually will map the fields. So if you notice, every single one of the fields that I have in here on the screen are already pre-populated. This is because when you use that spreadsheet, if the name matches exactly with the name in the CRM online database, it's going to automatically match to that field in your in the import. So if we keep going down, pretty much everything should be selectable except for the fields that were removed, just as I rarely see them on actual import files. So each of these selections here is going to be a list of all of the columns in your Excel spreadsheet. So on the left column, CRM field name, are the fields in the CRM. So the job is to match up the column name here in Excel with the appropriate field heading in the CRM. So if you have any fields that don't match or anything that you want to put to another place or remove, you can modify it from here as well. So for example, let's say I wanted to import one of these fields into anchors. Let's say it's going to be market. So I'm going to have the market field go into anchors there. Third column here is duplicate key. So if you notice, it'll automatically key the owner fields for you when you're matching them. So what the duplicate key means is use the fields that are marked with the key checkbox, and you check that checkbox just by simply clicking on the box or not clicking on the box. It tells the importer to use all of the columns or all of the fields here that are marked with a checkbox there to determine if a given record is a duplicate. So in this case, on the owner's fields, it's checking for duplicates based on the owner's full name, first name, last name, company, address, city, and state. So every time it goes and imports a row for a property, it'll then go and try to import a row for the owner contact. When it does that, it'll check all of those fields against what's already in the database, which is what's already been in there before, plus anything that's been imported up to the point that we're at in the spreadsheet. So let's say we're on row 15. It'll be everything that you already had in there plus the previous 14 rows of information. It'll check all of those fields, and if all of those fields match exactly with what's in the CRM, instead of creating a new copy of that contact, it'll just link that property to that owner in this case. And the same thing goes for the property side, which means that you can use the import not just as a way to upload brand new information, but also as a way to update information on a periodic basis. So a lot of people will use this process to export their information to an Excel spreadsheet, clean it up a little bit, and then import it back in. And then you can use these duplicate keys to find the exact same record in your database and just have it update the information. So on the property side, we can say, let's have it checked based on the address, city, state, and postal code. Of course, you could also ignore all those and have it checked for duplicates based on just the parcel number. Finally is update rule. So as I said, this can be used not just as a way to import new information, but as a way to update the existing information as well. And by default, each of these are going to be when blank. What that means is if it finds a duplicate, what to do with each of these fields. So if it finds a duplicate based on the address, city, state, and zip code, but let's say that the property name is not filled in the CRM, but is in our spreadsheet. When this is set to when blank, it will update the information as long as it's only updating it if it's blank. The other options are never or always. Generally, when blank is your safest bet, so that's why the default is set to that for each of them. But sometimes you'll want a specific field to always update from the spreadsheet and override anything that you might have in your CRM. Especially if you're using this as a way to, export information, update it, and then re-import it back in, always is definitely a lot more appropriate in that case. So once you've mapped all of your fields, made sure that each of the keys are set for how you want it to check for duplicates, and this might change depending on how your spreadsheet's set up. So these are just the most common fields that are used to check for duplicates. Like on people, you'll usually use some combination of their name and address. It's not going to be perfect because people's addresses do change, but if you do too few, if you just did first name and last name, it is very common to have two people with the exact same name in a database. I mean, there's a couple of Steve Smiths out there, for example, I've heard, and at least a couple of Matt Smiths just that I know. So it's kind of a fine line balance sort of thing that you walk with what you choose as keys. But this is a pretty good rule of thumb for contacts, is the name, address, and potentially the company. And It's going to depend spreadsheet by spreadsheet, though. Like I said, with properties, sometimes the partial number will be good as a unique identifier, but sometimes it won't be because the formatting might be different among different sources. So your mileage may vary on a lot of this stuff, and that's why importing can be a little bit complicated, is because it's a little bit different for every single person, because well, I shouldn't say no two spreadsheets are the same, because I definitely get very, very common ones very often, but general rule of thumb is they're not usually the same. So once you've mapped everything, you just hit next, and you're going to get your import options here. So this allows you to select who owns these records that you're importing, meaning that if one person on your team is importing in and wants it to be imported on behalf of another member of the team, you can change the owner there, as well as select the team settings. So when you import these, you can set these, for example, to private, so only you can have access to the information that's just in this import. You can also have it create history records on each of your contacts, either when creating a new record or when updates are made. Once you've selected your options, hit next one more time, and it'll give you a quick rundown of exactly what's going to happen there, how many records there are, and just hit finish there. And it tells you congratulations. Hopefully that exclamation point makes you feel good about what you just did, because honestly, importing is something that a lot of people definitely have some struggling with, and we have to do webinars like this on a fairly regular basis. So it's not just you, it's just it's somewhat non-intuitive process, but I think that the way that we've made the online importer has made that quite a bit simpler than it has been in the past. So I'm definitely excited to have this as the first time doing an import on the online version on a webinar. So give me just 1 second here. Sorry, weather's changing and my throat always suffers due to that. So that was importing on the online version. As of right now, it's pending in the background. I'm not sure how many imports are currently processing, but at the end of the process, it'll actually email us to let us know. So in this case, it'll send me an email at my personal email address letting us know that it's done, and you can then go into your properties and see that information directly. Looks like it was, oh yeah, there was only 11 properties, and probably everyone that's wanting to import is with us here right now. Okay, so this is what ended up coming in with the properties. And if we remember, we saw Curtis A. Bunce should be in there one time, but with 3 properties. If we click on Curtis here, it'll bring up his contact record, and we go into links and see all 3 of those properties linked directly to Curtis. So now we're going to quickly change gears. There was actually a question that is relevant to, and I probably should have covered it as well. Can you select a group when importing contacts? As of right now, not on the actual import wizard, on the online CRM. With the desktop import, yes, and that's something that will be added in the coming weeks here to the online CRM as well. It just wasn't ready at the time that we added the functionality to the system, but that is something that is coming, absolutely. And I will actually touch on that when we go into, when we actually do the import on the RealNex CRM. So, the desktop CRM importing. Now, you're going to have a few more options when you're importing into the desktop CRM, as it's had these capabilities for quite a long time, so we didn't have to reinvent the wheel for those, whereas the new imports are being written literally from the ground up. So those are coming as basically we finish them. Finish, test, and immediately upload and work on the next one. So we're trying to get as many of these out as humanly possible, and eventually you'll see the import options on the online version very much mirror the options on the desktop version. Although at the same time, you can also think of it almost as an import light version. It's a lot simpler to deal with. There aren't as many options, which can be great or it can be terrible depending on what your needs are for the import. I'd say the majority, at least 80% of spreadsheets that I see, would be perfectly done on the online version. And if I actually had a choice, if I have both the online desktop or the online version and the desktop version, and I have a choice of which one to import into, I would choose the online importer 90% of the time because it is so much simpler to do. And while I have a lot of familiarity with the desktop one, it's still, because of the number of options and different capabilities of it, can be a little bit more tiresome to deal with. But that said, it does give you a lot of different options that you can do that the online importer either isn't capable of or has limited capabilities on. So the importing in the online or in the desktop CRM is going to be under the File menu, under Import, and then File/Database. And you'll be greeted with the first screen of the Import Wizard. The first option, what kind of data do you want to import? These are the different import options. So just like on the online CRM, we've got contacts and properties, but in addition, you can also import directly into companies. That'll be coming very shortly on the webinar or on the online CRM as well. Spaces, units. So that would be for spaces would be for leasable retail spaces or office spaces, industrial spaces, as well as potentially the tenants that lease said spaces and how they tie back to properties. Units is going to be for multifamily mixes where you have multiple rows of data for each property, each one representing a specific unit mix. Sales comps and lease comps. Sale comps are going to be very similar properties, but also include information for who the seller is, as well as the let's see, procuring agent? No, that would be the buyers. Listing agent. And then as well as a record for the sale comp itself. And then lease comps would be pretty self-explanatory as well. Spaces, but also has lease comps as well as the lessor, lessee, and lessee's agent and lessor's agent, or procuring agent, and yeah. Anyhow, today we're going to be going over properties before I get off track too much there. The next option, so any of you that are going to be downloading the template and the map file, you'll be able to go in here and quickly just use an existing import map. And when you do that, you'll be greeted with a screen that has it has a list of the different maps that you've saved in here, as well as a From Disk button. So if you've saved that file to your desktop, you'll then be able to go navigate to where you've saved that file, select it, and then just select the spreadsheet that you're wanting to import. Now, I can't really cheat like that right now, as if I just did that, you wouldn't really get a whole lot of benefit out of the importing webinar. So we're going to go ahead and create a new import map and just torture ourselves a little bit, because I think it's worth it to help all of you out with this process. So the next step, create a new import map, is going to be comma delimited file with header. There are times when the other options are used. DBase file, probably not in about 10 years. But sometimes you'll have a spreadsheet where you don't actually have column headers at the top, meaning that first row that says, you know, this column is first name, this one's last name, and so on. So that's the other option that you might see occasionally, but even then I would actually suggest opening up the spreadsheet and adding column headers to it, because it makes this process so much simpler. And then finally, select the file to import. This is where you go and select the spreadsheet that you're wanting to import that has your property data in it. In this case, property, but if you had different type of data, you would select that appropriate file. Once you selected these, hit Next, and you will be brought to the Edit Import Map screen. So the Edit Import Map screen is separated into two primary sections. On the left side, we have the destination fields, as well as a number of tabs depending on what type of import we're doing. So because this is a property import, this is what you'll end up seeing. One tab for the property itself, one for a linked site contact, one for a linked owner contact, and one for a linked agent contact. And then each of these tabs has two sub-tabs where you can, for the agent, import a company record as well as a contact record, or one or the other. The import that we're actually going to be doing is going to import the property, and then it's going to import the owner as both a contact as well as a linked company record to it. And each of the different import options are going to have similar selections. So on the, for example, the sale comp import, you'll see sale comp and then linked records as the next option, and linked records will have property as another option. So it really gets a little bit more complex depending on how many tables you're importing into, because what you're doing is you're creating these relationships between the different records that exist on one row in a spreadsheet. So like when you're importing spaces, you might have 4 different unique records just on one row because they all relate to each other in some way. And so it can be a little bit of a difficult and arduous task to wrap your head around exactly how to process that. So Hopefully, one of the best things that you can really do is just continually try to import and regularly, fix the mistakes, make backups, which actually I'm going to go back one step because not mention this and should have way earlier on, making a backup in the desktop CRM. So prior to doing any sort of import in the desktop CRM, highly recommend you make a backup as it is a lot quicker and easier to restore a backup than it is to go through and delete multiple thousands of records if something didn't go right the first time. And I'll tell you from experience as someone who probably has used this, the import on the desktop software more than anyone short of probably the developers themselves, I never get it right the first time. I almost will always miss some small piece of detail because there are a lot of details involved with import mapping. I mean, when there's 10 to 12 fields, sure, those I can often get right the first time, but you start dealing with spreadsheets that go past the column Z, and your odds kind of go up. So always a good idea, and I mean, it takes no more than it took the amount of time to explain that to make that backup. So when making the backup for an import, I always uncheck shared files because that speeds up the backup process immensely, and imports cannot have any effect on your shared files. So even if you need to end up restoring the backup, your shared files will just be left alone in this case. You choose backup and then select where you want to back it up to, hit save, and it'll quickly go through and back up that database information. Okay, now we are safe. So I'm going to go back there, file, import, file/database, and we're going to select properties again. And I'm going to resist temptation to use an existing import map and get through this in 2 seconds. And then comma delimited file with header once again, and we'll select our spreadsheet once again. So we're going to hit next, and then, so as I was saying, it's split into 2 primary sections. On the left side are the destination fields. So this ends up representing the actual fields in the RealNex CRM. So when you're on the Property tab, when you click under here under Field Name, you'll see a drop-down list selection, and this selection represents the fields that are in the Property table. And so you can scroll through and see all of the fields that are available. So this doesn't include the owner information. So when it gets time to go do the owner information, we'll switch tabs here and go to the owner tab where you'll see a different selection of fields because contacts and properties and companies have different things that you track for them. Properties, for example, don't have proper full names. They have property names, but they're definitely a different type of name than a person's name. So that's why it's split into tabs so it can actually go to those different sections. So we'll start off by, I just usually go left to right, top to bottom, and then source fields. Source fields are the different columns in your Excel spreadsheet. So this is column A, B, C, D, and so on all the way to Z and so on down the road. So now that I know my ABCs, I can start mapping this this spreadsheet itself. So we see the field name and then the value. For the most part, string or the type is going to be unnecessary. That's really only used for the DBase and Access databases as they use data types. So you can usually even just do that to give you a little bit easier of a screen to look at here. So if you scroll down, you'll see a quick glance at the information. It's showing record number 1. And we can use these buttons down here on the navigation tab here to scroll through the records themselves and see the information that is in each of those fields. So this can help if you're not 100% sure exactly what you meant by the name of a column header and you want to just look through it and kind of get an idea for what it's like, or what it is. So the process of actually matching these fields. So like I said, I'll go top to bottom here. So the first field that I have is property name. So what I want to do here under field name is from that drop down, I'll scroll down to the P's and find property name. Select it, and then on the right side here under source field, we just drag and drop from here into the expression box here. And if you do it correctly, you'll see the field disappear from the right side. Not necessarily if you don't have this checkbox checked, which I'll go over in a moment, but you should see it removed from the right side, and you should see in the expression box fill in with the name of your column in Excel within brackets. That's really as complicated as it is to match each field. Now, of course, there's some things that will throw you curveballs. Sometimes you don't know exactly which field to select, so you'll have to, just like, for example, there might be a field that's in here that has a different name. So that's why you have to actually do that drag and drop method. So, a lot of the times the property address might have a completely different name, like it might be called street. One thing to talk about on addresses, though, is with addresses and properties, there's two variations on addresses that are pretty commonly seen, and it's about 50-50 I've noticed for which format's used. Sometimes the address will be in one column where you see it like it is right here, 3994 Claremont Mesa Boulevard. Sometimes it'll be split into its components. So it'll be the number, the street name, and the direction. So in this case, it would have the number and the street. So we actually have fields that can accommodate both of those. In our case, we'll be using the field called address and drag and drop there. However, if we had it separated into address number, street, and direction, there's a field called address number 1. There's also a field called direction and a field called street. So either way that your spreadsheet is, we made the CRM able to accommodate that on the actual import. And the same does actually apply for the online CRM as well. Contacts as a similar thing, so we'll go over that in a moment. But basically, at this point, once you've got the process, it's more tedious than anything else. So we can go here, property type, drag and drop, boom. Address 2, boom. City, bam. And so on down the list. So you'll just scroll through, and then what I'll end up doing in this case is skip all of the ones that have the word owner in front of them, and then pick up where I left off at acres. So now as we're scrolling through, I'm going to talk quickly about data types. So all of the fields in the RealNex CRM have a specific data type. For example, the acres field is a decimal. You can have a number with decimal points up to 2 places afterwards. Whereas a field like the transaction price is actually an integer field. And integer fields can only have numbers, whole numbers greater than 0 as data entry. So in the case of a price field, we see on sale price here and transaction price there, they have a $sign included in the actual amount. So when you're importing into the desktop CRM, it's a good idea to actually open the spreadsheet, and I'll actually load the existing map next time, since really it's just a matter of going through and dragging and dropping a whole bunch more. So it's a good idea when you're importing into the desktop CRM to go into those columns that have $sign amounts and do a find and replace on the $sign. So here's transaction price, do a Control F, go here to replace, find $sign, replace with leave it blank, and hit replace all. Okay. Interesting. Alright, in that case it actually has a CSV, it shouldn't actually even be. Okay, the CSV usually hard codes the $sign into the spreadsheet, but in this case, and probably most cases it's going to be easiest to do it this way. Right click on the actual column and do format cells and select number. And if you noticed, I actually also put the decimal places to 0 because, like I said, it's a whole number over 0, and generally with the transaction price you're on a multi-million dollar or multi-$100,000 property, I don't think the cents usually matter all that much for a database, really. And that's been consistently the case for most people. So there's that one there, and then the other one, we've got sale price. So right-click, format cells, number, and drop that to 0 decimals. And let's just make sure there's nothing else in here. So another would be phone number that you'd think that would have a problem as well, but with phone numbers, it actually has a way to automatically just extract the numeric information out and format it in that way. Should in theory be possible to do that as well for properties, and I'll actually bring that up to the development team now that I'm kind of thinking about that. But with phone numbers, you actually can leave those alone. But generally, you're usually only going to run into this on dollar values for the most part. I mean, there might be some occurrences where, like on a square footage field, for example, on the lot size, sometimes you'll see it look like that, where it has the letters SF afterwards. So in that case, you'd want to do a find and replace on the letters SF and get them out of there. So go ahead and save this and close the spreadsheet once again. Close this one as well. We're not using that anymore. And so now we'll go back in, and this time we're going to load the existing import map. So select properties once again, click on the three dots button there, click from disk, and we'll select that template file once again. Go here, select our spreadsheet file once again, and hit next. So when you're loading an existing import map, instead of taking you directly to the Edit Import Map screen, it'll bring you to a preview screen called Import Map. And on here, you can see all of the fields that have already been mapped for you. On here, you can also check the errors checkbox. So prior to actually changing those $signs out of the CSV file, it actually would have shown those fields in red here. So this will show any problems with data types, and will tell you basically what to do with those. So you can get a quick scroll of your information. You can scroll through using the same navigation buttons here, and you can see exactly what's going to go into each one of the records here. If you do need to make any changes, we can hit Edit Map to go back. Now I wanted to talk about owner as well. So we have everything mapped here now, but again, mapping the fields is really a simple matter of you select the field from the drop-down. You can also put your cursor on the field and type the name of the field. So let's say we also wanted to add the web page field. Just type the first couple letters of it and then scroll down, and let's just find, yeah, sure, we'll put the notes field into the website field just for funsies. And so the owner tab is separated into two separate imports, a company and a contact, that ultimately will end up getting linked together. So the company tab, when you map these fields, and actually let's just, it only takes a few moments honestly for me to do this. I'll leave these ones alone as you don't need to do it all again. So we'll go ahead and map the company fields. And we'll see why it's a good idea to do the company fields first prior to the contact if you're going to have both. So first off, our first field here is going to be company. Drag and drop company. And one thing you'll notice is with the company name, it also automatically puts it into the organization field. So you actually can have different layers of a company hierarchy. That goes for the organization at the top. You can have subsidiaries below that, although you don't have to. And then you can have companies below that. And the way that the system organizes the companies is any two companies that have the same organization name are going to show up in the same organization in the CRM. So we'll just quickly do the remainder of these fields. Address 2, city, state, and postal code. All right, zip code. So now, when we click over to the Owner Contact tab and scroll down, we'll see those fields automatically already got mapped for us. So it assumes that the contact and company are going to share that information, so it doesn't require you to remap it on the contact side there. The one thing you do have to do, though, is the keys. So just like on the online version of the import, you have a column for keys. And that means use these fields that are checked for key to determine if a record already exists in the database as a duplicate. So ultimately what this means is we have a spreadsheet of 11 records in it. It's going to go through and import each of the 11 properties and each of the 11 owners on those properties. Each time it goes and imports a row, it's going to check on the company side. When it imports the owner's company, it'll check the company name, address, and city. And if those three fields, all three of them, match exactly to another company record in the database already, it will not import a duplicate. Instead, it'll do whatever it's told to here to update the existing records. So this is where you can set a default option for all of your fields. And so I set up the template with when blank, so that way if it does find a match but one of the pieces of information is not filled in our database, it'll add that piece of information to it. But if it's filled in differently, it won't override what we've already got in the CRM. So for companies, these are some common fields that you would use for mapping for keys. Company name, address, city, and I'll just do state too for the heck of it. And then the contact side, I'll actually do the full name, the address, and the city. Property side as well. So the property, I've got it set to match on the address, city, state, and zip code, which is actually probably a good thing because I'm pretty sure these properties already do exist in this database. So just so I can make sure that I find these again, I'm just going to mark these to make them easier to, actually let's do this. I'm going to match to a field called import source. So now when you actually have, this is kind of outside the purview, and we will actually be having an advanced importing webinar in the near future here that we're planning out. This will be gone into a little bit more depth there, but the expression box here, there's a reason it's called expression and isn't just where you match the fields. It can do quite a bit more than that. But one of the most common things is putting something right into there that's not a column in your spreadsheet. So in this case, I want to mark all of the fields, or all of the 11 records that are in here. I want to put the word, in the import source, I want to put the word webinar. So within quotation marks, I can just put the word that I want to put into that field there. And for all of these records, it'll automatically, and I'm going to actually set this to always, I can then find all of these records based on that one field. So we don't actually have a column in Excel that matches up to this, but we're just using, you can put text within quotation marks to put it in there for all of the records in the spreadsheet, which can actually be useful, for example, when you're on the contacts. Let's say we wanted to mark investor for all of these contacts when it imports them. Well, we can select the investor field and go here to the expression, and within quotation marks, just put the word true. That will automatically check that checkbox for all 11 of these contacts. Well, there actually should only be like 5 or 6, but all 5 or 6 of these contacts. So now we've got all of the fields mapped here. We can then save the map, and now when we go here and select a name, this will actually save it directly into our CRM, so we don't have to hit from disk next time. It'll just be on the selection list here. So I'm going to go ahead and name it webinar import 32. Hit OK, and so we'll hit OK once again. Again, we're greeted with the preview screen of our import, and we'll hit next. So we'll see options similar to the options that we saw on the online import prior to this. We'll see who we want the record owner to be. We can select the team, so we can set the privacy of who is able to see these records. So I've got a retail team that I've created, so only the retail team, any members of that, will be able to see these records. So in addition to that, there's one other option on the desktop version on this screen that you see that you do not see yet on the online version, but again, that is going to be coming, and that's importing new records that are in this import into a group. So I want to actually put all of these records into a group. However, the key word on this is new records. So if you're using this to update existing records, the existing records will not be placed into a group. So in that instance, you would need to do something similar to what I did prior, where I went to the import source field and made it the field webinar. That way I could have a way to search all those and add them to a group after the fact. So when you're updating existing records, it's a good idea to use, that's actually what this field's made for too. The import source is just made as a field to update so you can find records again. So I'll go ahead and make the group. I'm pretty sure that these records are already in my database, because I'm pretty sure that the example template that we used was based off of this database as well. But I'll name the group webinar nonetheless and hit OK. So we'll hit next one more time, and then next one last time, and it'll start importing the spreadsheet. This one should be a reasonably quick import, as it only has 11 records. I'm really curious. We had 196 properties prior to this. We just imported 11. Yeah, all of them were already in there. But like I mentioned, we can now go in and query. So we can bring up this and go to import record, or import source rather, and find all of them with the word webinar in them. And we see the 11 properties that we just imported that were basically rebrought in. So if you actually notice, it did actually change one primary thing here. In our database, Balboa Office Park was owned by Alan Giffen, and now is owned by Chelsea Brubaker, and you can see that based on the date being the same as today's date. So it found existing records, but instead of making new copies, it brought them in and linked to the appropriate records. And so if we go and find one of those records with Curtis Bunce, we should see him as owning 3 separate records, or three properties here. Well, yeah, 3 properties there. So at that point, we could We found our 11 properties. We can then right-click on that group that we added, add lookup to add those 11 selected records to the group, and now we have them in there. And now we can also use that map over and over again. So if we get another spreadsheet that has, similar columns, we can always go through and just copy and paste them into the same format and use that map over and over again. So the tediousness of matching up each and every one of those fields, dotting all of your T's and crossing all of your I's, that was completely backwards, but I'm going to stick with it because it sounds so much better. And I don't know letters apparently, but it's a lot better than having to do that over and over again, especially because there's always, like I said, it can be tough to get it perfect the first time. The one that I actually loaded and saved earlier was the result of importing actually 3 times in my case. So I mean, it's something that it can be a little bit complicated to deal with, and you're dealing with a lot of points of data, so it can just be, I don't know, a little bit overwhelming as well. So sometimes it's also a good idea to take a short break in the middle of an import and kind of take a look at it with fresh eyes 10 minutes later. But I do want to open it up for any questions that anybody had along the way, anything that might not have been answered over the course of the webinar, any snags that you guys have been running into along the way. Don't hesitate to utilize this time and ask away. There's definitely nothing that I would consider a silly question, to be honest, as I remember learning this process myself, and so can empathize with each and every one of you when you run into an issue with it. And while I wait to see if there are any questions coming in, just a reminder, when you are importing into the online version, I just want to reiterate this, be sure to go through and remove any columns from the spreadsheet that you don't actually need to track, as it does make the import process take quite a bit longer. When you're dealing with computer to web components, the process is a lot lengthier to deal with because you have multiple computers talking to one another, whereas when you're dealing with it just on your own computer or even just on your own network where you have a server computer as the host for your database and a workstation, it's still going to be a lot quicker because it's one computer to one computer. So definitely when you're importing on the online database, just go through a little bit and let's say we don't really need the lot size, we don't need the market or the stories. Just select those columns and delete them, and that'll increase the speed of the import immensely. I mean, yeah, the import that I actually did during the example process took all of like 30 seconds, and it did have actually a lot of columns, but it was also only 11 records, and most spreadsheets I see agents and brokers uploading tend to be more in the neighborhood of thousands, so it can take quite a bit longer when you're dealing with real-world data. Let's see. So there was a question. I have properties loaded in the desktop version, and I want to add owners now. What is the best way to approach it? So that kind of goes down to the concept. It's actually a mixture of importing new records and updating existing records. So the properties are already in the database in that instance. So when you're doing the actual import process, so I mean, ideally you'll just set your spreadsheet up something similar to this. So you'll want to have, of course, the owner information as their columns, but you'll need to have the spreadsheet have some information to reference the property that they own. So if the properties are already in there, generally you're not going to need any of the secondary information like acreage or anything like that, as that should already be filled in. You just want it to go in and add the properties. So it should look something like this, where we can use most of these fields to determine which field is, or which property the owner relates to, and then use these to add the actual owner information. So then I can actually just quickly save this as well. So basically, to put it in a quick phrase, updating properties with ownership. There we go. So in that case, you would then, of course, have to make a new map for that. So we'll do a properties import. So when you're doing that, even though you already have the properties in there, you do still have to do it as a properties import. And then technically we could use that existing import map again, but again, that would be cheating. Comment a limited file with header. We'll select that spreadsheet that we just created, question 1 update, and hit next. So it's not as important to make sure that we get each and every single field from properties over here onto the map, because we're really just using this as a way to find the existing property to match and import the owner. So we would match those fields here. We've got address, and I'm just going to use the exact same ones that I did last time: city, state, and zip. And so these are the only 4 fields that I'm going to bother with mapping, and I'm going to mark all of them as key, because we don't expect any new properties to be added by this, so all of those should match the existing records in our CRM. The important part is to then go over to the owner tab and match the owner fields up. So we can do just like last time, go here to company name, company address, and so on. Go do the company as well, or contact as well. And so each row, it'll find an existing property in theory, because all of these should match exactly what you have in your database. And then it will import the new owners and link them to the existing properties that way. So you can definitely, you can also use it as a way to update ownership. For example, let's say you regularly get information from a specific data source, but the ownership information might change. So if you do an import again, and the same properties are in there, but the owner's different, it would unlink the first owner and link the new owner, either adding them to the database if they're not already in there, or linking an existing contact the way that it would on any duplicate found. All right, well, I don't see any other questions, so I'm just going to kind of talk aimlessly for a couple seconds just to make sure that everyone gets them out of their system if possible. But of course, if you're doing this process and you do have any specific questions, probably one of the easiest ways is actually, if you have a specific question like that, shoot us an email at support@realnex.zenda.com, and we can take a look at those and help on a case-by-case basis, depending, because like I said, each import is going to be different, and what worked for one person might not work for another, and some of the things that I talked about on here might not end up completely applying to you. So that's just the way that it is. I mean, yeah, I don't really think I was going anywhere with that. Never mind. That's just the way that it is. So I don't see any other questions in here. So Sarah, if you want to play me out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bobby. We will be sending out a link to some templates that Bobby alluded to during his webinar. And if you have any questions, you can send them to info@realnex.com, and I'll get those passed on to Bobby. And that's it. Thanks so much for joining.